The morning light filtered through the gauzy curtains of the bridal suite, casting an ethereal glow over everything it touched. Olivia stood motionless before the ornate mirror, a vision in white satin and delicate lace. Her reflection stared back at her, poised, beautiful, yet something lurked behind her eyes. A heaviness. A shadow. She couldn't name it, but it sat like a stone in her stomach. "Something's wrong," she whispered to herself, adjusting the pearl earrings her grandmother had worn on her own wedding day. The stylist behind her chatted excitedly about the perfect weather, the gorgeous venue, the handsome groom waiting. Olivia nodded mechanically, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She dreamed of this day since she was a little girl, imagined every detail, rehearsed the moment 1,000 times in her mind. So why did she feel this invisible weight pressing down on her chest? Why did every breath feel shallow? "It's just nerves," she told herself firmly, but deep down she knew something was off. Something was wrong, and she couldn't shake the feeling that by sunset, everything would change. "You look absolutely stunning," Rebecca gushed, her perfectly manicured hands zipping up the back of Olivia's dress with practiced precision. As maid of honor and Olivia's best friend since college, Rebecca had insisted on helping with the final preparations. "Ethan won't be able to take his eyes off you." There was something in her tone, a slight tremor, perhaps, that made Olivia glance up. Through the mirror, she caught a glimpse of Rebecca's expression, a smile that seemed just a fraction too tight, eyes that darted away a second too quickly. Olivia's phone buzzed on the vanity. A text from Ethan, "Can't wait to see you. Today is going to be perfect." Simple words that should have warmed her heart, yet they felt hollow, rehearsed. She stared at the message, remembering how his hands had trembled when he proposed 10 months ago, how his voice had cracked with emotion. Where was that vulnerability now? Where was that raw, unfiltered love? Rebecca leaned over her shoulder, eyes lingering on the screen a beat too long. "He's such a romantic," she said, her voice tight. Something cold slithered down Olivia's spine. An instinct, a premonition, a warning. The memory came unbidden, Ethan down on one knee in the small Italian restaurant where they had their first date, rain pattering against the windows, candlelight making his eyes shine with unshed tears. "I knew from the moment I saw you," he had said, voice shaking, "that you were the one I wanted to build a life with." The ring box had trembled in his hands as he opened it, revealing the vintage diamond that had belonged to his grandmother. The entire restaurant had fallen silent, watching this intimate moment unfold. Strangers with phones raised, capturing what looked like perfect love. Olivia had cried then, overcome with joy and certainty. She remembered thinking how lucky she was to have found someone who looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. Now, sitting in her wedding dress, that memory felt like it belonged to someone else. A different Olivia, a different Ethan. Had he really been nervous with love that night? Or had it been something else, hesitation, perhaps? Doubt? "I didn't see it then," she murmured to her reflection, "but now I can't unsee it." The photographer called for the first look photos, that carefully orchestrated moment when the groom first sees his bride before the ceremony. Tradition reimagined for the sake of timing and perfect lighting. Olivia stood in the garden gazebo, back turned as instructed, heart racing as she heard Ethan's footsteps approach on the stone path. "Ready?" the photographer asked cheerfully. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The moment Ethan saw her should have been electric. A gasp, tears perhaps, that look of awe she'd seen in 100 wedding videos. Instead, when she turned, his smile seemed practiced, his compliments rehearsed. His eyes kept drifting over her shoulder, scanning the garden perimeter where Rebecca stood watching, clipboard in hand, supposedly managing last-minute details. Olivia noticed how his hand tightened slightly when Rebecca waved discreetly at him. How his Adam's apple bobbed when he swallowed hard. The photographer directed them through poses, hands joined, foreheads touching, profiles silhouetted against the afternoon sun. In every frame, Ethan seemed physically present but emotionally elsewhere. Olivia felt it like a physical ache, the distance between them growing wider with each camera click. An hour before the ceremony, Olivia sequestered herself in a small anteroom of the chapel to review her vows one last time. Words she had agonized over for weeks, wanting them to be perfect, honest, eternal. "Ethan," she whispered to the empty room, her voice catching slightly, "you are the calm in my chaos, the answer to questions I didn't know to ask." The words felt different now, hollow in ways she couldn't articulate. Through the crack in the door, movement caught her eye at Rebecca slipping past, glancing furtively over her shoulder. Something in her posture, her hurried steps, sent a cold tremor through Olivia's body. She stood silently, drawn to the doorway by some protective instinct. Through the small opening, she saw Rebecca pause by a decorative alcove, checking her appearance in a compact mirror, adjusting her bridesmaid dress with uncharacteristic nervousness. "She was behind me the whole time," Olivia thought, suddenly understanding the nagging worry that had plagued her for months. The canceled lunch dates. The strange tension when all three of them were together. The way Rebecca always asked about Ethan with an intensity that went beyond friendly interest. A soft piano melody drifted from the chapel, the musicians warming up. The countdown to forever had begun. "The florist forgot your corsage," Ethan told Rebecca, his voice carrying down the hallway to where Olivia stood frozen, hands still on her vows. "I know exactly where it is, I'll grab it for you." Something in his eagerness made Olivia's skin prickle. His offer seemed too quick, too convenient. Rebecca's reply was too low to hear, but her laugh, that was audible enough. Light, breathy, intimate. The sound of a private joke shared. Olivia watched from her partially open door as they disappeared down the corridor together, Ethan's hand hovering unnecessarily at the small of Rebecca's back. Several guests milling in the entryway noticed, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. Mrs. Henderson, Ethan's godmother, pressed her lips into a thin line, shaking her head slightly. Olivia's cousin Taylor raised her eyebrows, then quickly looked away when she realized Olivia had seen her reaction. 15 minutes passed. 20. The wedding coordinator checked her watch repeatedly, whispering urgently into her headset. Olivia remained motionless, her heartbeat counting down seconds that stretched into eternities. When they finally returned, Rebecca's corsage looked perfect, but her lipstick had been freshly applied. Ethan wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. James, the photographer Olivia had hired, an old college friend who'd built a reputation capturing genuine moments rather than posed perfection, approached her quietly as guests began filing into the chapel. "Liv," he began, using her old nickname, hesitation evident in his voice. "I don't know how to say this," but he stopped, conflict clear on his face. She knew James, he wasn't one for drama or gossip. "What is it?" she asked, although something in her already knew. He pulled his camera from around his neck, thumbed through several images on the display, then turned it toward her. There, captured in high-definition clarity, Ethan gently brushing a strand of hair from Rebecca's face, his fingers lingering against her cheek, their eyes locked in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. The timestamp showed it was taken just before the first look photos. James lowered the camera, his expression grave. "I didn't want to be the one to show you this, especially today, but I'd never forgive myself if I didn't." He paused, studying her face. "Should I delete it?" Olivia stared at the image until it burned into her memory, then shook her head slowly. "No," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Keep it." Ethan reappeared just as the wedding coordinator began lining up the bridal party for the processional. Olivia's eyes immediately cataloged the details. His boutonniere slightly askew, a button undone on his waistcoat, a smudge of something faintly pink on his collar. Rebecca's shade, she realized with cold clarity. Rebecca, who now stood with the other bridesmaids, wouldn't meet her eyes. The chapel was full now, 200 guests waiting to witness their vows, their promises, their lies. Olivia said nothing, did nothing to betray the hurricane raging inside her. She simply watched as Ethan straightened his tie, wondering if Rebecca's fingers had been the ones to loosen it. "You okay?" he asked, finally noticing her silence. His concern seemed genuine enough, but now she could see through it, the performance, the practiced sincerity. "Perfect," she replied, the word like glass in her mouth. Her father appeared at her side, resplendent in his tuxedo, eyes misty with emotion. He would walk her down the aisle in minutes, giving her hand to a man who had already betrayed her. The irony wasn't lost on her. The string quartet began Pachelbel's canon, their cue to begin. "Ready, sweetheart?" her father asked, offering his arm as they took their position behind the large wooden doors of the chapel. The bridesmaids had already processed, Rebecca last, her walk down the aisle more suited to a runway than a sacred space. Now it was Olivia's turn. The bride's grand entrance, all eyes on her, the culmination of months of planning. But her hands trembled so violently she could barely hold her bouquet. "Are you okay?" her father whispered, concern etching lines around his eyes. "I just feel cold," she managed, the understatement of the century. Cold didn't begin to describe the ice spreading through her veins, the glacial clarity of her thoughts. Her father mistook her silence for nerves, patting her hand reassuringly. "He's a good man, Liv. You've chosen well." Had she, though? The question echoed in her mind as the wedding coordinator signaled it was time. The doors swung open, revealing the chapel transformed into a floral wonderland, faces turning expectantly toward her, the man waiting at the altar, the wrong man, she now realized. Not because he wasn't right for her, but because he had never truly been hers to begin with. As the first notes of the bridal march filled the chapel, a small hand tugged at Olivia's veil. She looked down to find her 7-year-old cousin, Emma, flower girl extraordinaire, staring up at her with solemn eyes. "I have to tell you something," Emma whispered urgently. "It's important." The wedding coordinator made frantic hurry-up gestures from the doorway. Olivia knelt carefully, mindful of her dress. "What is it, sweetie?" Emma leaned close, her child's breath smelling of the mints they'd given the bridal party. "I saw Miss Rebecca kissing Mr. Ethan. In the room with all the flowers. They didn't see me because I was hiding." She said it matter-of-factly, the way children do, unaware of the bomb she'd just detonated. Olivia felt the world stop. Sound receded. The chapel, the guests, the music, all of it faded to a distant buzz. Emma's small face showed concern. "Are you mad? You look mad." Olivia somehow found her voice. "No, sweetie. Not at you. Thank you for telling me." She stood slowly, a strange calm settling over her. She smiled brilliantly at the waiting guests, but her eyes, anyone looking closely would have seen they had turned to steel. The walk down the aisle took an eternity. Each step felt weighted, deliberate, as if she were moving through deep water rather than across the petal-strewn runner. Faces blurred on either side. Family, friends, colleagues, all wearing expressions of joy that now seemed grotesque in their ignorance. The string quartet played on, the melody now grating to her ears. Ethan stood at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo, wearing what she now recognized as his public face, the charming, devoted fiancé. Beside him, Rebecca stood with the other bridesmaids, eyes fixed on a point somewhere above the guests' heads. refusing to look at Olivia. The groomsmen flanked Ethan's other side, including his older brother Marcus, successful, reserved Marcus, who always seemed to hover at the edges of Ethan's orbit. Unlike everyone else, Marcus wasn't smiling. His dark eyes were watchful, intense, moving between Olivia, Ethan, and Rebecca with an expression she couldn't decipher. Did he know? Had he seen what she had been blind to? Olivia continued her procession, each step bringing her closer to the moment of decision. Her father squeezed her arm gently, mistaking her tension for emotion. She squeezed back, grateful for his steady presence, even as she calculated what would come next. 3 steps from the altar, Olivia paused. A collective breath held in the chapel. An unscheduled moment, a deviation from the carefully orchestrated ceremony. Her eyes caught movement to her right. Ethan and Rebecca's hands, partially hidden behind a large bouquet arrangement, fingers intertwined in a grip that spoke of desperation rather than celebration. When they noticed her gaze, their hands unlatched like they'd been burned, but not quickly enough. Never quickly enough. A ripple of confusion passed through the front rows of guests. The officiant cleared his throat uncertainly. Ethan stepped forward, extending his hand to her with a questioning smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Olivia?" he whispered, the name both question and plea. She didn't move. Instead, her mind raced backward, assembling pieces of a puzzle she should have completed months ago. The late-night texts he'd shielded from her view. The weekends when Rebecca was too busy to join their usual brunches. The business trips that coincided with Rebecca's mysterious vacations. How had she been so blind, so trusting, so foolish? The chapel remained suspended in confused silence. 200 witnesses to her moment of reckoning. Her father leaned close. "Sweetheart." She squeezed his arm once, then let go. In that frozen moment at the altar, Olivia's mind flashed back to earlier that morning. She had been looking for her something borrowed, her grandmother's handkerchief, and had wandered down the hallway of the bridal suite. The door to the small preparation room had been slightly ajar, and through it she'd caught their reflection in the antique mirror on the wall. Rebecca pressed against the credenza, Ethan's hands tangled in her hair, their kiss passionate, desperate, guiltless. Neither had seen Olivia, their eyes closed, lost in each other. She had backed away silently, unable to process what she'd witnessed, her mind protecting her from the truth until this very moment. Now the memory surged forward with perfect clarity. The way Rebecca had arched into him. The practiced ease of their embrace. This was no first transgression. This was the comfortable choreography of an ongoing affair. Olivia stood at the altar now, the truth settling around her shoulders like a heavy cloak. They hadn't known she saw, but she had. She had seen everything. And now so would everyone else. The officiant stepped forward again, concern etched on his features. "Shall we begin?" he asked softly. Olivia lifted her chin, a single tear escaping despite her iron control. But it wasn't a tear of heartbreak. It was determination crystallized. Olivia stepped forward, surprising everyone by taking the microphone from its stand beside the officiant. The amplified sound of her breathing filled the chapel as 200 guests shifted uncomfortably in the pews. Ethan's face drained of color. Rebecca took an unconscious step backward. "I want to thank you all for coming today," Olivia began, her voice surprisingly strong, melodic even. "We've gathered in this beautiful place to witness a union, to celebrate love." She paused, scanning the faces before her. "But before we proceed, I want to tell you all a story about betrayal." The word hung in the air like smoke. Ethan moved toward her, hand outstretched. "Liv, what are you? Don't," she said quietly, the single word stopping him cold. "Don't pretend anymore, Ethan. It's exhausting, isn't it? The lying, the sneaking around. having to remember which stories you've told to whom. Her gaze shifted to Rebecca, who stood frozen, tears already streaming down her perfectly made-up face. I trusted you both, completely, without reservation. She turned back to the stunned guests. You came to witness vows today. Instead, you're witnessing truth. And the truth is, she looked directly at Ethan now. I deserve better than this. We all do. I discovered this morning that my fiancé and my maid of honor, my best friend since college, have been having an affair. The words dropped like stones into still water, ripples of gasps and murmurs spreading through the chapel. Not just a momentary lapse of judgment, not a drunken mistake, a deliberate, ongoing betrayal of trust. Olivia's voice remained steady, almost conversational, which somehow made her words more devastating. Ethan stood paralyzed, mouth opening and closing without sound. Rebecca had collapsed into silent sobs, supported by another bridesmaid who looked equal parts horrified and fascinated. I want to thank you, actually, Olivia continued, addressing them both. Thank you for showing me exactly who you were before I made the biggest mistake of my life. She turned back to the guests, many of whom were now openly crying or whispering furiously to each other. I was going to give you my forever, she said, removing her engagement ring with deliberate slowness. But now I'm going to give it to someone who deserves it. She placed the ring on the small table that held the unity candle. I came here today to marry the love of my life. I still intend to do exactly that. Confusion rippled through the chapel at her words. Ethan's mother half rose from her seat, clutching her husband's arm. And then, a movement from the groomsmen's line caught everyone's attention. Marcus stepped forward, tall and imposing in his groomsman's tuxedo. His movement deliberate but unhurried. Unlike his younger brother, who had always carried himself with performative charm, Marcus radiated quiet confidence. The guests watched in stunned silence as he approached Olivia, stopping just short of where she stood. "Are you sure?" he asked, his deep voice carrying in the hushed chapel despite his low tone. The question hung between them, loaded with history and possibility. Something passed between them, a current of understanding, of recognition. Olivia nodded, a small smile touching her lips for the first time since she'd entered the chapel. "I've never been more sure of anything," she replied, loud enough for the front rows to hear. A collective intake of breath from the assembled guests. Ethan stepped forward, face contorted with disbelief. "What the hell is happening?" he demanded, looking between his brother and his almost bride. Rebecca remained frozen in place, mascara tracking down her cheeks. Marcus didn't acknowledge either of them. His focus remained entirely on Olivia, as if they were the only two people in the room. "I should have spoken years ago," he said simply. "I was wrong to stay silent." He extended his hand to her, palm up, an invitation, not a demand. Olivia placed her hand in Marcus's, their fingers intertwining with natural ease. She turned to the officiant, whose professional composure was admirable given the circumstances. "Father James, I still intend to get married today. Just not to the man I thought." The officiant looked uncertainly between the brothers, clearly calculating the ecclesiastical and legal implications of such a pivot. Marcus addressed the bewildered man directly. "I have the license," he said quietly. "I've had it for weeks, just in case." This revelation sent another shock wave through the assembly. Ethan's face darkened with comprehension. "You planned this?" "Both of you?" he sputtered. Marcus shook his head. "I planned nothing except to support whatever choice she made today. The rest is all Olivia." He turned back to her, his expression softening. When he spoke, his words were for her alone, though in the perfect acoustics of the chapel they carried clearly. "I've loved you for years. I just never wanted to hurt him." She reached up to touch his face gently. "Now I know love shouldn't have to hide." She turned to the officiant. "Will you marry us, Father?" After a moment's hesitation and a glance at the church deacon who gave a slight nod, Father James adjusted his stole. "Dearly beloved," he began again, "we are gathered here today." The ceremony proceeded with surreal simplicity, as if the universe had simply realigned itself around this new reality. Guests remained in stunned silence, phones discreetly raised to capture what would surely become the wedding story to end all wedding stories. Ethan had stormed out, followed quickly by his parents and Rebecca, who had to be practically carried by two other bridesmaids. But here at the altar, something authentic and powerful was unfolding. When the time came for rings, Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I've carried this for 3 years," he confessed as he opened it, revealing a vintage emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. Nothing like the large solitaire Ethan had given her. "It was my grandmother's. She gave it to me before she died and told me to save it for the one." Olivia's eyes filled with tears as he slipped it onto her finger. A perfect fit, as if it had been made for her all along. Perhaps, in some way, it had been. "Just in case," he whispered, echoing his earlier words. The phrase took on new meaning now, not a contingency plan, but a declaration of patient hope. Of faith that someday, the truth would find its way to light. Of love that had waited in the wings, never demanding center stage, but ready when called. When Father James pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss that followed was unlike anything Olivia had ever experienced. Soft yet certain, gentle yet electric, a beginning rather than an endpoint. The chapel erupted in applause, hesitant at first, then building to a thunderous crescendo as the sheer romantic drama of the moment overtook any lingering shock or disapproval. Through the open doors at the back of the chapel, Olivia caught a glimpse of Ethan watching from the vestibule, his expression unreadable. Rebecca stood beside him, their shared deception now their only common ground. For a moment, Olivia felt a flicker of pity. They had lost far more than she had today. Then Marcus's hand found hers again, and the feeling passed. The recessional music began, not the triumphant Mendelssohn march they had rehearsed, but something the organist chose in the moment. Beethoven's Ode to Joy. As they walked back down the aisle together, guests reached out to touch them, to offer congratulations, to be part of this unexpected fairy tale. Someone called out, "Best wedding ever." Another voice, "Now that's how you handle a cheater." Phones recorded every moment, social media already ablaze with what had transpired. By tomorrow, their story would circle the globe, the bride who lost a cheater and gained a hero in the same hour. Later that evening, as the hastily rearranged reception swirled around them, Olivia stood for a moment on the terrace of the venue, champagne untouched in her hand. The sunset painted the sky in shades of fire, oranges, pinks, and gold stretching across the horizon. A perfect ending to an imperfect day. Marcus appeared beside her, his presence already familiar in a way Ethan's never had been. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. She considered the question seriously, searching herself for doubt, for fear, for hesitation. Finding none, she shook her head. "Only that I didn't see the truth sooner." She turned to face him fully. "How long have you known about them?" "Since Christmas," he admitted. "I saw them at the hotel bar when I was supposed to be in Hong Kong. I almost told you then, but it wasn't your truth to tell," she finished for him. He nodded, relieved at her understanding. Behind them, the band struck up a new song and cheers erupted from the dance floor. Life continuing, reshaping itself around this new reality. Olivia raised her glass in a private toast. To rock bottom, she said, a smile playing at her lips. Where I found the gold. As they rejoined their celebration, phones continued to capture every moment, the unexpected bride and groom, radiant despite it all. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. Share it with friends who need a reminder that sometimes the worst moment of your life can lead to the best. Comment below with your thoughts. Have you ever had a moment when disaster turned into opportunity? When betrayal led to something beautiful? When rock bottom became a foundation instead of an endpoint?